So, good afternoon and good morning to all participants of today's webcast. This is a Ranger 4 webcast. I'm Helen Beal. I'm a DevOpsologist here at Ranger 4. We are DevOps evolution specialists, and I'll talk a little bit later about why we prefer to use that term. The topic of today's webcast is DevOps just continuous improvement? Those of us, or those of you that know us well, will know that we did a survey around a year ago called How Continuous is Your DevOps?, which led to several conversations last year about DevOps and all the continuouses, and the fact that sometimes we feel this is an overused term in DevOps. We've got things like CI and CD and continuous funding and continuous testing and all sorts of things. But today we're going to focus in on this idea about whether DevOps is simply just another term or a label that could be used for continuous improvement. So I thought a good place to start actually is to talk about the history of DevOps really, and where it's come from and how it's morphed already into what we would describe it as today in 2017. So really it started back here, so 10 years ago now, which will shock a lot of people, when Patrick went to a conference in Toronto, this Agile conference, and Andrew Schaefer had put up a talk about Agile system administration, and Patrick thought it looked very interesting. Unfortunately, no one else did. So he was the only person that turned up to that talk. In fact, he was literally the only person that turned up, because Andrew didn't either, because he thought no one else was going to turn up. But Patrick tracked him down and they had a chat about it, and they really talked about this conflict that they felt was happening in classic sort of enterprise IT shops, if you like, where the IT development teams and the IT operations teams were very siloed, were speaking different languages, were getting very frustrated with each other, and they really felt there must be a better way. And if you fast forward a few years, we get to where the DevOps term really came about, where Patrick started using it on Twitter when he launched DevOps Days, a very well respected and known event that runs worldwide in many different locations now. Hopefully some of you on the call have had the pleasure of attending one or two of them. As time went on, more and more automation tools popped through. You can see some here, some not so well known anymore. You can see some of the analysts starting to get involved, so Forrester and Gartner getting to see things going on. The big vendors starting to think that they may have some messages for the DevOps world as well. Really big launch of cloud a few years back, the launch of the DevOps Institute, the launch of the Phoenix Project book that many of you will have read and will certainly respond to or talk about a couple more times during the course of this talk. We had the Phoenix Project game come out last year, so our experiential learning or simulation game based on the book. We saw the DevOps Handbook come out in October last year, of course, also written by Gene, who was one of the co-authors of the Phoenix Project. That's Gene Kim. Also John Willis, who we'll talk about a little bit more as well, and Patrick and Jez Humble, who we'll mention again in a few minutes with regard to something else. So as you can see, DevOps has become quite a few different things, or has come quite a long way. You can see here a Google Trends graph. You can really see, so what this arrow is telling us here is that Google Trends graph. That hook is starting in 2001, and then it hockey sticks up. So DevOps has become a few different things as time has gone on. So I also published last year, also from Gene Kim's press, the IT Revolution press, was a book called The Art of Business Value. If any of you came to the DevOps Enterprise Summit in London last June, you would have received a copy. It's a great book, it's quite short, it's really fun to read. It gives us some new insights on how we might want to articulate to the business people around us what we're trying to do when we're doing DevOps. And I quite like this definition of DevOps. So in a sense, it being this value delivery factory, this streamlined, waste-free pipeline where we're delivering value to the business or our customers with a predictably fast cycle time. So I think that nicely summarises what we're trying to do, because in a way in DevOps, we're always trying to resist purposeful definition of it. We don't have a manifesto in the same way that Agile has a manifesto. There is a definition on Wikipedia, and it does get updated, but most people try and avoid that. We say things like DevOps is about making better software faster and more safely. I always like the Don't Fight Stupid, Make More Awesome from Jesse Robbins. So we try and there's lots of things that contribute to our sense of what DevOps is. And what this picture here is really trying to say is we're trying to get this balance with DevOps in terms of kind of not caging it. We don't want to restrict it perhaps in the same way that we've learned with things like ITIL in the past. If we really try and pin things down, it can be very dangerous in terms of being overly prescriptive to people about what something means and what they should therefore do about it. So we want it to fly free like a bird. We have this concept of CBOC we talk about quite a lot, so this collective body of knowledge. So these different strands of thinking and different opinions and discussions that all contribute to the thing that DevOps is. So many of you will be familiar with this acronym CAMS. It's very popular. It originated with John Willis. There's a link to one of his articles about it in this slide, which will be sent out at the end of the webcast. It's also on SlideShare. It's also in the handouts in your screen if you're currently on the webcast itself. So CAMS is I often refer to it as an elevator acronym. So if someone is asking you what DevOps is really about, it's a short way of describing kind of 4 lenses that we're thinking of when we're talking about DevOps, and you can read them for yourself there. Some of you may be wondering, or the eagle-eyed among you may be thinking that there was one missing. Hopefully it will become clear shortly why that particular one you might think is missing. So last year, let's start back in June. In June, I was at the DevOps Enterprise Summit talking with one of our customers, Lego, about the correlations between this thing called holacracy and DevOps. And all through the year last year, I did several talks and several blogs and things on this harmonious polygamous marriage, which is a term I stole or borrowed, perhaps more nicely, from our very good friend Jane Grohl, who runs the DevOps Institute and also the ITSM Academy. She talked about this harmonious polygamous marriage is DevOps, and the kind of 3 spouses, if you like, that she was talking about in that marriage were ITSM, Agile, and Lean. So these 3 component parts coming together. When I was at DevOps Con in Munich back in December, I was again talking about these correlations between holacracy and DevOps. And John Willis, who I mentioned as the originator of CAMS and also one of the co-contributors to the DevOps Handbook, was also there. And we had a chat after my talk, and he talked about the fact that I've now kind of introduced these 4 things. And he said, actually, I've got this 3-legged stool. So I'm thinking about these 3 things: the learning organization, the safety culture, and theories of constraints, all contributing to it. And it was a bit of a kind of, that actually DevOps is becoming the product of a lot of convergent thinking, if you like. It's evolving quite rapidly, and there's lots of different streams of thoughts and practices and disciplines that are all contributing to what we're trying to achieve. Some of you may have noticed that there is a watermark behind this diagram. That's the watermark of the British £2 coin. Not all of them, but few of them have around the edge a phrase which is standing on the shoulders of giants, that you may be familiar with, that originated in Greek mythology quite a long time ago, as you can see, where the giant Orion had a servant sit on his shoulders to be his eyes. And then that was kind of commandeered by a gentleman called Bernard de Chartres back here in 1159 AD, so again quite a while ago, when he started talking about standing on the shoulders of giants in terms of using Greek philosophers' thoughts to form the foundation of his own thinking. It was used again by Newton, who again sort of contributed or said that a lot of his success was really due to the thoughts that had come from the scientists and people before him. And then in 2000, it was used by Oasis, so I rather like this one. So a big Britpop band. This was actually their 4th album, their 4th studio album. The story goes that I think it was Liam, it may have been the other one, was in the pub and kind of was just looking at a £2 coin and scribbled it on a cigarette packet and decided it would be a good name for his album. And you'll notice that the S is missing off shoulders here. So apparently that was a slightly drunken mis-scribble on the cigarette packet. But interesting how this phrase has come along. And I put it in there because what I'm really saying is that in some respects, DevOps is standing on the shoulder of these other giants. So we saw them there in the diagram. So let's have a look at each of them in a bit more detail. So I'm going to do it in alphabetical order just to show I have no favourites. So let's start with Agile. So, Agile really is very much an underpinning concept around DevOps. It's easily arguable or often argued whether DevOps can exist without Agile. I think you can deliver some DevOps practices without being Agile. So, for example, you could do continuous delivery theoretically in a waterfall project, but generally what we're doing with DevOps is building on the promise of Agile. And there's plenty of quotes from people out there explaining how kind of Agile took software development somewhere, and ops really need to keep up. And we'll come back to that theme when we look at ITSM in a moment. So these are our 12 principles, and I've highlighted a few bits in green, which I think are quite common in terms of DevOps thinking. And you'll see these patterns as we go through these different converging thoughts and disciplines. So one is about putting the customer up front and center. There's this idea of continuous delivery, and this is another. I've mentioned CD already. I think when we say CD in DevOps, we often mean a DevOps toolchain or something quite automated. I think we're also talking about process, and I think people kind of miss that and forget that we're also trying to understand how to make that process continuous as well as the actual action, if you like. We have a lot of focus on value. Again, customer up front and center. We have speed and velocity. We have this S from the CAMS acronym, so sharing and collaboration. The cultural element, we need to motivate people, we need to find motivated individuals, we need to help people be motivated, give them the support that they need. We need to trust them. We need to build high trust environments. Again, the Agile manifesto here in its 6th principle is suggesting that we need to have face-to-face conversation. That's really part of sharing, it's part of culture as well, but it's not practical for all of our customers. I have to say, we work with some very large clients, and actually we even have some smaller clients that are doing things like moving their IT operations to the Philippines, for example. And it means that face-to-face conversation is not always possible. Some of our larger global clients also do follow the sun, so they're doing handoffs around the world. And obviously that's just not physically possible to be done face-to-face, but there are lots of technologies. So there's sort of collaborative technologies like Confluence, there are chat and video technologies like HipChat, and all of these things can help tackle that one in the face, if you like, of geographical restrictions. Number 7 highlights the M in CAMS. We have this concept of kind of sustainability, which I would classify as a cultural thing. So we're really trying to not burn people out. So if we talk about human ops or hug ops, what we're really trying to do there is help things continue at a pace that isn't going to implode or explode. We want technical excellence. We want simplicity. So we're going to be covering more about simplicity in a little while. We have a particular insurance customer who had a project called the Da Vinci Project, and it was called that because Da Vinci said that simplicity is the ultimate sophistication, which we always think is quite a clever term. We have this concept of self-organising teams. Again, we'll see commonality between some of these different threads in a few moments. And we have this idea of reflection, and this is the team really reflecting together. So I've kind of alluded to this. What we're going to be doing is really bringing all of these threads together under CAMS. So this first one, again, just to reiterate, this elevation of the customer is really key. Building this culture where support and trust are inherent is really key. Having teams self-organise. When we look at holacracy, we'll talk about why that's important in a little bit more. And we understand that behaviour is adjusted as an output of reflection. Automation, Agile, you don't, strictly speaking, have to automate to be able to be Agile, and you don't have to use Jira to be Agile, and you don't have to do CI and CD to be Agile, but they're all very closely linked. So if you want to actually release that software that you developed at the pace that you're developing it, automation is going to help very much there. We have lots of ways to measure in Agile as well. So if we're doing Scrum, for example, we can be doing our sprint burn downs. And we'll come to other kind of visual board mechanisms in a few moments as well. So, and then we have this daily collaboration between business and tech. So we have our stand-ups, again, if we're doing Scrum. So this idea that people are talking to each other very regularly and very openly. So just to draw back to this one, this 10th principle, this simplicity, the art of maximising the amount of work not done is essential. That's really going to bring us to lean. So the eagle-eyed among you who knew when I talked about CAMS which letter was missing, it was L for lean. You'll have probably worked out that it wasn't in CAMS because it was in the Superpattern as part of the harmonious polygamous marriage. So we will go into lean in a few minutes in more detail. But a lot of these practices do link together. And in fact, as we move into this next one, holacracy, the background to holacracy is very much from Agile practitioners who recognised that the way that Agile was trying to evolve software could also be applied to an organisation and the way that you might want to evolve an organisation. So if I try and describe what holacracy is, I would say it's an Agile organisational management system or technique. So I said earlier that I've been talking about holacracy and the correlations between them for quite a while. So there is a link in the presentation to a blog post that I wrote back in July last year, so a little while ago. But the kind of things that I was drawing out in this, and this was off the back of the presentation that I did with Lego, were really around things like the self-organising teams, big correlation between the two techniques. So this idea that people have autonomy and mastery and purpose, and we have distributed authority where we're not in a kind of traditional command and control or bureaucratic culture, but people are actually given the freedom and wherewithal to make decisions on how to do their daily work. Other things include a dislike for job titles. So if we're trying to be flexible, and again, in terms of Agile in particular, we're trying to create smaller teams where people are cross-skilled and cross-functional and they can move around teams fairly freely, not too often. Not every sprint is not a great idea, but fairly frequently. So having job titles really, we feel, kind of labels us and puts us in a box. So what we would rather have is actually a description of job roles, which allows us to be much more fluid. One of the things, again, that holacracy is not so keen on is very strict annual budgeting. And again, with DevOps and Agile, again, what we've really learned is that if we do traditional budgeting, it's very, very waterfall in the extent that we go through an annual budgeting process. So sometimes people are spending budgets that have been set 12 to 15 months before. So we're really trying to move away from that and break that down. So there's lots of things that holacracy is trying to achieve, and I could talk about it for sort of half an hour or so, but we've got a few other things to talk about today. So let's just summarise that one as well. So as I said, very much an Agile organisational management system. What we're trying to do is distribute authority. One of my favourite stories is about Waterstones. When Waterstones was taken over, they instead of pushing out the kind of window displays and what the best sellers were and what everyone should sell down to each store, they allowed each store to decide what their local markets would like. They became sensors. So in the measurement column there, you will see that everyone's a sensor. So this idea of kind of feedback loops from the people that are on the ground. There is automation in holacracy, so there are some automation tools that help us manage the circles and manage the meetings. It's not mentioned that much in this table. One of the things that holacracy does is it has ways to run meetings. So most organisations that we work with, was with one just yesterday, a charity up in Bedfordshire, who said we just have far too many meetings here. It's meetings for meeting's sake, and we hear that a lot. And meetings generally end up very long, and it's generally because there's one or two people that have a lot to say, and that's often to the detriment of other people and the time of the meeting. So holacracy does introduce ways and methods of running meetings to ensure that you don't have too many, they don't last too long, and that everybody has an equal voice in them. So moving on, before we move on for a moment, this is a note. So when I first discovered holacracy when I was reading a book called Reinventing Organisations by a gentleman called Frederic Laloux. And it caught my eye because we have so many conversations with organisations about how to change culture. It's quite easy, in effect, to build a tool chain relatively to changing a culture or changing multiple human behaviours. But this quote quite nicely summarises, I think, what we're trying to do with DevOps, and actually what this is a Holacracy quote, but I think the similarity is here as well. So change no longer is a relevant topic because the organisation constantly adapts from within. So we love this change from within idea, first of all, and this is what we really try and encourage when we're trying to make cultural evolution, rather than getting rid of everyone and hiring a whole new load of people. We need to understand what's going on now and help people to evolve their behaviours moving forward. So it's much more about evolution than some kind of revolutionary transformation. So it's giving you the tools to make incremental change. So moving on to ITSM, part of our harmonious polygamous marriage. So I'm actually going to cross it out and replace it with something else. So the something else I'm going to replace ITSM with is ASM. So rather than IT service management, I'm going to focus on agile service management. So ITSM has a bit of a history with ITIL. I already mentioned ITIL a little bit disparagingly as something that perhaps the industry got overtly prescriptive about, which caused quite a lot of delays and potentially lots of waste in organisations, lots of process pain, as people felt they'd ended up in very bureaucratic places where things were very slow to move and happen. So with Agile Service Management, we're really trying to address that. We're trying to apply Agile principles to the service management or IT ops teams. So if we're changing rapidly in the development teams and we're expecting to push through change very rapidly, we need the ops teams to be able to respond to that. So we really need the IT ops teams to be working in an agile manner as well. So doing things like just good enough around their service management processes, and understanding how to deliver things at the kind of speed that the development people need. So culturally, we need to learn to have this idea of just enough governance. So I do think that's a cultural thing. It's a mentality change from a lot of people that have been very belt and braces and very stability driven. And I'll re-emphasise this fact later, but I don't think we're compromising any stability by doing just enough governance. It's about balancing. We're very much trying to encourage this continuous learning environment. Again, we're going to come back to that later in the context of the Phoenix project. There's lots of automation that we can use in Agile Service Management. So we have service desk tools like Jira Service Desk and ServiceNow. We have monitoring that really can help us lift things up early and help us do preemptive failure. We're going to come back to that shortly as well when we talk about safety cultures. We have the ability to use cloud and release automation, environment orchestration to enable people in the ops team to deliver faster. And typically we do have measurement in ITSM, and we can talk about which metrics really matter there, but they have been very SLA driven. I don't think measurement's often something that ops are short of. It's really the right ones. And then the sharing, fundamentally this is a really key one that we find with lots of organisations is really having a common or a shared vocabulary across particular teams or parts of the organisation can make a huge difference in terms of people's ability to collaborate effectively. So moving on to lean, the L that's often in CALMS. When we've been using lean, we've been using value stream mapping actually in particular for quite a while with organisations to help them get on a DevOps journey. We can do assessments, we can try and build out business cases, but there's nothing like a value stream mapping exercise in terms of identifying where the waste is and putting together a plan to move forward. So I mentioned when we looked at the short history of DevOps about the DevOps handbook coming out in October 2016. We were delighted when it came out to see some of the focus on this value stream work because it's very much in line with our philosophy on how to do DevOps. Value stream mapping is quite hard to do. We would recommend getting a facilitator in to help you do it and help you facilitate that work between your team. It's normally quite a senior management team that would do value stream mapping. So culturally, again, if we go back to Agile, we're talking about elevating this customer. Again, we've got this focus on the customer very much with Lean. So it's very common. We're really, I used to use the phrase quite a lot, looking outside in. So really getting from the customer's point of view, thinking about that. When we're using things like Kanban, we're talking about pulling work across the board. So only working on it when the customer has specifically asked for it. And we're trying to get rid of waste. So we're trying to really improve flow. And again, we'll summarise that later on as well. The kind of waste that Lean is often seeking to eliminate in the IT world, and it's, I'm sure everyone on the call knows that Lean thinking originally came out of Toyota and it came out of the manufacturing world. In the IT world, the type of waste that we're particularly trying to eliminate are things like manual errors and duplication, the kind of things that automation's absolutely born to do. And we use Kanban to measure velocity. We also use value stream mapping to expose this waste and measure our improvement in a particular value stream. A value stream is very important in terms of sharing, because quite often what we find in an organisation is that they don't really understand what the value stream looks like end to end. There's no one person that can visualise it and knows each step that's involved. So value stream mapping exercise is a really good way of lifting that view up and getting people in a room that can really understand which are the processes that are involved, where are the handoffs, where are the constraints or the problems in that process. So just a few words on value stream mapping metrics, the kind of things that we're interested in. So there's really three. So we're interested in the single process time. Some people refer to it in slightly different words, and this lead time. So the process time is the actual time that somebody's doing something, and then we have the lead time, which is the end-to-end part of the value stream. As you can see, there's quite often bits or parts where the work is actually idle in there. And then the other metric that we're really interested in is this percentage complete and accurate. So this is really important when we're thinking about how we collaborate effectively with each other and where waste is. So if we're constantly giving somebody something to do and they're constantly having to come back and ask us to correct it or improve it or elucidate or give us more detail on it, then that's creating a lot of waste in our pipeline. So moving on to the learning organisation. So there's a statement from Peter Senge, who's one of the big thinkers, the slightly later thinker on this, but this idea that organisations or learning organisations are where people continually expand their capacity to create the results they truly desire, where new and expansive patterns of thinking are nurtured, where collective aspiration is set free, and where people are continually learning to see the whole together. It's very aspirational, it's very utopic, but we'll come back to learning again in a minute, is why it's such an important part of DevOps. And perhaps there's no problem with being aspirational. If you remember, the title of this presentation was actually, Is DevOps Just About Continuous Improvement? So building knowledge and the capability to learn in our organisation can only generally be a good thing, particularly in the high knowledge environments that we work in IT. So I think that definition's pretty important and kind of brings me back to the Phoenix Project again. And in the Phoenix Project, we have the three ways which underpin everything that's in the Phoenix Project. So we have the first way being flow, the second way being amplified feedback loops, and the third way being continuous experimentation and learning. And you've heard me say about flow already. Agile is very much about flow. Lean is very much about flow. Agile is very much about the feedback loops as well. And you would have heard me use the term about everyone's a sensor when we're doing holacracy. And again, that's about providing feedback. And then we have this idea of experimentation learning, and you'll have seen that pop up in the Agile Service Management side as well. So to summarise around the learning organisation, what we're trying to do is decentralise the role of leadership, and you'll see that as a common thing with holacracy in terms of getting to distribute authority. So we're trying to you'll see this note here as well, we're preferring coaching over management. You'll remember from Agile, or in particular Scrum as well, that the role, for example, of the Scrum Master is very much a servant leader. It's a coaching role. And a learning organisation has the same goal. Sustainability, again, we talked about sustainability earlier on. We haven't mentioned technical debt. A customer used a phrase the other day, technical insolvency, which I thought was brilliant. But we talk about cultural debt a lot too when we talk about DevOps. So we're trying not to compromise where we're going to be in the long term by doing things shortcutting basically in the short term. Things like knowledge management tools can really help us in the automation area. And you see I've got a blank bit here in measurement. I really haven't come across how people measure this yet, or whether it's important. So if anyone has any comments that they'd like to make about that, then that would be very welcome. And around sharing, what we've got really here is we've got this idea of exposing these mental patterns, and we'll come across this again in a minute when we talk about the theory of constraints. So this is the idea of being transparent with each other and using each other as sounding boards, as mirrors, to try and identify the way that we think, helping each other to do inspection. And again, you may be familiar with the three pillars of Scrum. Transparency, and the second one is really about inspection, so TIA, and the third one being adaptability. So inspection, again, you'll see these commonalities, these patterns across all of these thinkings that they share. So talking about safety culture, so as we said, Lean came out of manufacturing, mainly out of Toyota. We've got the learning organisations, which wasn't really started in IT, it was sort of started in governmental organisations and healthcare. And then we've got the safety culture. And some of you may recognise this very sad picture as Chernobyl, which is really where the safety culture term started to come out from. And you may be thinking, well, we don't work in a nuclear power plant, and that's true. And so we have to really think about what we're talking about when we're applying safety cultural thinking to IT. There's a few of these charts around. I'm a little bit, I don't feel they're that useful, but this is kind of like the standing thing that we're, these are the levels we're going up. But the interesting thing is here we've got continually improving. So level 5 is continuous improvement. So we've done this, we're cooperating, so we're collaborating, very DevOps term, we've involved people. So we've got the high level commitment, we're moving up that stream. This is another kind of safety culture maturity model, but this is around cybersecurity. So again, things to note here, trust has a place again, informedness, so this idea of transparency and sharing knowledge as we move up the different levels of cybersecurity capability. So many of you would have heard phrases like fail safe, fail fast, fail often, fail smart. So these are very DevOpsy terms. So when we think about that third way, about experimentation and learning, we do want to experiment a lot because that shows we're innovative. We have customers like Lego that have prizes that they give to people that have had the most spectacularly failed project because it is indicative of how innovative they're being. And then there's lots of companies that do that sort of thing. But we don't want to fail in a way that is to the absolute detriment of our business's survival. So we have to find ways of protecting ourselves against catastrophic failure. And this is where I think the safety culture really comes into what we're trying to do in IT. So it's really about building the capability that means if we do have an experiment that doesn't work, it doesn't really kill what we're doing. So another note from the DevOps handbook, and really I've highlighted the green bits here because these are, as far as I'm concerned, I think the most kind of safety oriented things. So having these pre-blessed security libraries, running code quality and security scanning tools, so automating the testing, automating the security capability. And we're really talking about automating security at the very front end of the SDLC, or if we're going to think about a continuous release lifecycle, at the very start of the loop. So integrating security testing capability at the IDE level, so we can flag with developers that they are maybe about to put something in the code that is going to be a problem. So this is from Sonatype's recent DevSecOps community survey. As a webcast tomorrow afternoon, I'll be participating on the panel where we'll be looking at some of the results, but here's a little sneak preview for you. So what we're seeing here is the responses to this question from 3 years ago, and then the responses this year in the sort of lime green from everybody, and then the purple from the people that self-identified as being quite mature in terms of the DevOps practices. So what's quite interesting is you can see obviously the more mature people are doing more application security analysis overall, but they're also doing much more earlier. So in the design and architecture phase, making sure it's analysed there, that they have got that non-functional requirement, that NFR has been considered in terms of what the security people need. This one's the really big one as well, is testing it in development and all the way through. So to summarise in safety culture, a little bit of, it's got culture in the name, so I'm thinking it's quite a cultural thing. And as I said, if we're going to build these highly experimental, innovative environments, we really need to build safety in. We need to be able to fail fast and fail smart and fail often and not bring everything thumping down around us. And automation is often really key for us to be able to do that. So I just touched on how we can automate security in, so build security in really early on. We can also do things like do testing very early, which we've talked about. We can also do things like have release automation that allows us to roll back or re-release or redeploy a last known good state very quickly should we run into or encounter a problem. We can also do things like preemptive monitoring, so use things like Dynatrace, for example, to be able to tell us when a system may be about to come down, not when we've just had an outage, so giving us some early warning. Lots of measurement in the safety culture. In IT, we're particularly talking about mean time to response, but what we really like to do is if we do have outages or if we do have performance issues, the ultimate metric is going to be about value. So getting back to those first few things we were talking about in Agile, really being able to report value issues back to the business in terms of real numbers, real revenue or profitability numbers. So moving on to the final piece of the DevOps Superpattern, theory of constraints. So I mentioned this earlier, these mental models. So we've got these mental patterns here in the learning organisation. The theory of constraints also talks about these mental models, and we understand that people can be a constraint and behaviour can be a constraint. We also understand that automation can remove huge manual constraints. Getting back to the safety culture and linking it to this for a moment. Chernobyl and things like that and safety issues in a lot of industries and organisations can be kind of life or death issues. And we often feel perhaps that we're not talking about life or death issues when we're working in IT, but there are certainly certain industries where that is not true. So I was doing some work with a US health insurer a few years back, and we were working on, they had an IBM MQ series upgrade, a major upgrade coming up. And their traditional method of doing that upgrade is they had what I often term a script monster. So somebody in their organisation, very clever person, had over time written more and more and more and more scripts to replace manual processes to do this sort of upgrade. But they were upgrading sort of 8,000 machines, and that was going to be quite risky and very difficult to unpick if it went wrong. This is where we get often IT heroes. So they're these people that are really clever, they've built these amazing things, and when they break, they're the only person that can fix them. So they become the hero that everyone's relying on at 2:00 on the Sunday morning when that release has gone completely bendy and they need somebody to fix it. So for them, actually automating that process was really, really key. And the point that they made to me is that actually for them, they felt like it was a life or death situation, because if they got that wrong, the chances of potentially sending people the wrong medicine or no medicine or messing up their plans were quite high, and that could cause them a life or death situation. And there are three key measures when we're talking about theory of constraints. So we've got throughput, operational expense, and inventory. So some very clear metrics that matter there. And the constraints very frequently in IT are due to poor handoffs between teams and things like that. So just another little timeline for you. This one I thought was quite interesting to look at these elements of the super pattern that are evolving together to see sort of where they've come from, and some of them have been around a really long time, such as Lean, around since the 1950s. Newest one, Holacracy. Agile started in Snowbird in Utah with a bunch of people that got together and write the manifesto. ITSM, well, ITIL was really written down by the UK government. In 2014, it became sort of owned by Axelos between the government and Capita. Learning organisation, again, some key moments in that. The fifth discipline is a really key bit. So that's Peter Senge's book that came out again in the early 1990s. Safety culture, as I said, really started with Chernobyl. And the theory of constraint started with the goal in the 1980s, which was the predecessor really for the Phoenix project. So that's really where Gene based that particular book on. And then in the 1990s, we also had a critical chain book from Goldratt as well. I put a little world up here because I thought it was quite interesting how a lot of these ideas came from different places around the globe. So I've mentioned Utah, I've mentioned the UK government, we've mentioned Toyota Asia, we've mentioned safety culture in Chernobyl in Russia. I think it may even have still been the USSR then. So There's a widespread global movements that are coming together. So another way I thought of looking at this, again, this is my first draft of this particular slide, so if people have comments or observations on this, what I was trying to do here is I was really trying to look at, these 7 components of the super pattern against the 3 ways, and giving them a tick if I felt that they were really aligning to it. So for example, I don't feel that Agile has a particularly strong focus on experimentation and learning, but other people may feel very differently about that, in which case I'd like to hear about that. Whereas things like the theory of constraints, I think, is absolutely firmly focused on flow, but maybe not so much on feedback loops. It's really primarily concerned with getting that throughput, as is lean, primarily concerned with getting that waste out of the system. So change is hard to do, particularly when we try and see it as a very big bang approach. So when we use things like kind of revolution, even transformation. So I increasingly prefer using the term evolution, as I did earlier when we looked at that comment about holacracy and change. If we think of change happening incrementally, I think it's much more effective if we take a much more sort of agile approach to how we're implementing change, because nobody wants to change. Everybody says that they want to change, but nobody really accepts that they need to change within themselves. So it's a very incremental process where we learn new behaviours and learn new thinking and principles and practices over time. And it's even harder for people to want to stand up and lead the change because, frankly, it's stressful and it's demotivating a lot of the time, and you have to put up with a lot of apathy and resistance, and it can be really challenging. So if we tap these some of newer approaches to change, where what we're trying to do is incrementally change behaviour, or incrementally evolve behaviour, it can be a lot more effective. So this is a little conversation that I had on LinkedIn a few months ago with Magnus Hedmark. He was commenting on an article that I'd shared, and he talked about the iron triangle that we've often thought that we've had in IT, where you can only have 2 of these 3 things at once. So, let's go back. So you can only have a low-cost project in a short timescale if you're going to compromise on quality, for example. But what we were saying is that actually with DevOps, we're saying you can have this. We can build quality in, and we can do it cheaply, and we can do it quickly. So we can get speed, we can get cost, and we can do things in very high quality, not just from security perspectives, but also from performance and testing early to get any defects and bugs out as well. And that gives us this 4th dimension, delight or happiness, whichever term you prefer. Some of you may be familiar also with the term human ops or hug ops, which is very much kind of sat here as well. We've talked about sustainability, and I've mentioned trying to avoid things like burnout. So with DevOps, we believe you can have it all. And that may be one of the ways that we kind of define how it's different from continuous improvement. Maybe this is kind of the goal that we're setting out, whereas continuous improvement is more about just kind of getting together regularly to get incremental change. The other way that I think DevOps looks at evolution differently from just continuous improvement is about value stream again. So we talk about ideation to realization quite a lot. Damon Edwards talks about the heart of Kaching moment. So this idea of being able to measure a feature from its inception and being able to measure its value real time to the business whilst it's live in production, and taking that and squishing it down. So concertinaing the time. So if you think about lean and the theory of constraints and agile, all of these things that we're doing are trying to take time and waste out of this process and help us get that innovation into the customer's hands to make them that smiley face as fast as we possibly can. So just finishing off with the DevOps loop, I just mentioned ideation to realization. This is our view of an SDLC. So I used to draw an SDLC in a very linear perspective. This is really a continuous release cycle. So in the same way that you may prefer, for whatever reason it is, to describe DevOps as continuous improvement, you may prefer to describe DevOps toolchain as a continuous release cycle. It really doesn't matter, I don't think, as long as you keep your eye on the goals that you are trying to achieve and your organisational purpose, your organisational why, and the reporting of value back to the business. So hopefully that has given some clarity over why we do think DevOps is often just about continuous improvement. Some organisations we work with have embarked on DevOps projects in the past, and they've had problems with quite often it will be things like the developers really taking control of it and throwing away some of the process around stability and controls, and DevOps getting itself a little bit of a bad name that way. Other organisations we work with, when we do things like an assessment or a lift-off workshop, there'll be a kind of sigh of relief, and people say, oh, thank God, we haven't missed a huge trick here. We're doing this already. We just haven't been calling it DevOps. So I have overrun a little bit. So I don't seem to have any questions currently in chats, but this is the Q&A section now. I've got some actually in the chat box here. So you mentioned VSMs. Do you provide VSM training so we can carry them out ourselves internally? We can train people to do VSMs, yes. We are also VSM facilitators or value stream mapping facilitators. What we often find with organisations is that they'll think, yeah, we really need to do that for this product line or whatever, and then we'll do it with one, and they'll want to do it with more. And it becomes quite a big kind of commitment at that point. So what we try and do is take an approach. So a value stream mapping exercise is pretty intensive. There's a lot of people in a room working really hard for a few days. So we have two facilitators from our side that will normally do it. So if we're training an organisation that is forecasting that they'll have a lot of value streams that they're going to want to map themselves, we'll start with them as an observer in the room, and then we'll start with them as the kind of secondary facilitator. Then we'll act as the secondary facilitator with them, and then we'll finally act as observers, and then we can continue coaching teams after that. So another question, if everything is getting faster and automated in IT, are we in danger of fewer available jobs? Yeah, I think this is a question that a lot of people are asking themselves across the globe in lots of different industries at the moment, with self-driving cars and all sorts of things like that. I do see some governments also trying some quite radical things in terms of universal benefits. So basically giving everyone a basic salary to live. And then if you want to earn more on top of that, that's kind of up to you. I think there's a lot of people that think that's going to be where we're going to be in sort of 30 or 40 years. Are we in danger in IT? Well, with DevOps, lots of organisations we work with do want to do DevOps for productivity savings, but most people realise that they need to do it for competitive advantage. So rather saying, oh, well, if we automate the release process, we can get rid of 5 people. It's more about if we automate the release process, we can release on demand, or say 5 times a week. We can recognise that value of that idea this much quicker, and we can beat our competition and make our customers happier. So kind of linked to that question, I think, what would be some key skills to pick up in order to stay ahead of the curve? So, yeah, I mean, there was quite a lot of skill sets we went through during that. So there's obviously the kind of obvious DevOps automation skill sets. So learning how to build a tool chain end to end, so that continuous release cycle, learning how to hook things like Confluence and Jira and Bitbucket and Bamboo together and use something like Dynatrace to analyze what's going on. There's also a whole bunch of soft skills around using things like Lean in particular, and Agile, and becoming a really good Scrum Master. So there's a whole host of different options to people there. And any more questions? Oh, one final question. Are there any training options you'd recommend? Well, yes, of course we would. So Range 4 is a DevOps Institute registered education partner. I sit on the DevOps Institute Board of Regents. So I have some involvement in what courseware comes through. So we've been running the DevOps Foundation course now for a good couple of years. Lots and lots of graduates of that or alumni from that worldwide. We've also been running the CASM course, the Certified Agile Service Manager course. So we talked about Agile Service Management earlier, for about a year and a half. Great for IT ops people wanting to understand how their counterparts are working and wanting to make sure that they can match their velocity. We also have CAPO, Certified Agile Process Owner, which is basically the equivalent of a Scrum product owner. And just coming through at the moment, we've got the DevOps Test Engineer, DevSecOps Engineer, Continuous Delivery Architect, and DevOps Leader. So if you're interested in any of that, let us know. So I have overrun today, so I do thank you all very much for your time. You will receive a follow-up email with the recording and the link to the slides. And I hope you will have a wonderful rest of your day wherever you are in the world. Thank you very much and goodbye.